Hey everyone, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today I want to talk about why we may be seeing the end of the current social media era as we know it, and I think that's probably a good thing. Now here's what's going on. Now this is coming from just basically a really fascinating article by Paul Ratner of Big Think, and I'm going to incorporate a good chunk, or rather I did incorporate a good chunk of what he wrote into my notes here. So let's start, because I want you to consider this. Before we actually dive in, let's frame the current era of social media. Now, I think one of the biggest drivers of social media is the platform of Facebook. You guys know my stance on Facebook. I've been talking about it in various ways for years at this point. They basically exploded and were the only game in town in 2013, just killing off MySpace, Friendster, and a whole bunch of others, and kept growing up to about somewhere between 3 and 4 billion at their height. They were basically the foundation of this era in social media, and everything else was essentially built after that platform that started to really grow in different ways. And so with that, let's get into why this era is probably ending, and I think that's a good thing. So, according to estimates, we check our phone about 80 times a day, or once every 12 minutes, with a large part of that actually spent interacting with Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and other social media platforms. Some people obviously are way more than this, obviously, because this is an average of 80 times a day or 12 times a minute. Obviously, there's a good chunk that are less, but here we are 80 times a day checking our phone. Now, on top of that, many people are actually spending more time online in front of computers or web browsers on a device. So for example, I might be checking my phone periodically throughout the day, but if I'm sitting here at my desk, I'm not really checking my phone so much as I do, have things open on my computer via web browser and all of that. And so that's obviously, on top of the 80 times a day that we're doing that. Now, there's also a real separation anxiety that is starting to kick in when you're not checking your phone or your web browser. And basically, that is becoming a very serious issue. So by virtue of all of this, it's basically an addiction, and it's being integrated into our culture in various ways and a part of our daily life. You see social media in movies, again, where we're on our phones constantly and continuously. I go out to dinner and I see people with little kids and they hand them a phone or a tablet, and the kids are doing whatever they do to basically shut up while the parents talk or whatever that is. So this is basically very pervasive in our lives. Now think about this. It is to the point where people have gained or lost jobs via social media. The President of the United States uses social media, specifically Twitter more than anything else, although he has a Facebook and apparently a Snapchat profile as well, but he uses social media to drive his agenda. So how could this era possibly be coming to an end? And how could social media as we know it possibly die? And I think the bellwether for this could be the social media employees themselves, along with other factors, but we're going to start with them. So for example, and this was mentioned in Big Think, Facebook executive Chamath Palihapitiya, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and I apologize if I'm not, recently said on CNN that he feels guilty for what he has helped to create in Facebook. Now, he specifically focused on Facebook and how it was used by state-sponsored actors out of Russia in 2016 to sow disinformation into the electorate, not to mention explosion of conspiracy theories, both homegrown and international, and on and on and on. So, this executive, or former Facebook executive, said, and I quote, "Do I feel guilty? Absolutely, I feel guilt. Nobody ever thought that you could have such a massive manipulation of the system. You can see the reaction of the people who run these companies. They never thought it was possible." Now, aside from the guilt that many employees are feeling for perpetuating this quote-unquote monster, we also have to discuss what is happening to our brains by virtue of social media. Now, this is an addiction, as I mentioned earlier, but it's also leading to some rather serious mental health issues for a good chunk of the population. Now, consider that Nottingham Trent University did a study that concludes by saying, and I quote, "It may be plausible to speak specifically of Facebook addiction disorder." That is something I believe that they a term that they had coined. Now, they refer to basically how for some people that are using Facebook very heavily, this can lead to neglecting their personal life. It can lead to escapism and actually altering their moods. A 2015 study by researchers at the University of Missouri found that regular use of Facebook could lead to symptoms like depression, while a study of young adults found that Facebook can make them feel basically less of who they are in the moment, decreasing their life satisfaction. Rather than provide the social engagement that Facebook claims to offer, Facebook can actually lead to isolation and other negative psychological effects. I mean, and you can see it pervasive throughout society. So, for example, high school reunions, for example, have basically population, or rather those who attend in person, has decreased dramatically by virtue of Facebook and social media, because, well, if I don't want to run into the jerk from 10 years ago when I graduated high school, I can just go see what he or she is doing online. And so that has affected that, not to mention the fact that a lot of us say, well, I talk with my friends all the time. Well, sure, we're posting or arguing about God knows what online, as opposed to actually seeing each other in person. This is pervasive throughout society. And to continue, a recent UK study found that of the 1,500 Facebook and Twitter users who participated in their study, 62% had feelings of inadequacy, meaning, as you are trying to post and sculpt that perfect life online, look at me on a sailboat and everything is wonderful, and, you get off camera and you're yelling at your spouse and, and all of that. But what people put out tends to be that picture perfect thing. So 62% of people have just feel a certain level of inadequacy, and 60% felt jealous after comparing themselves to other social media users. So, look at me with my massive house and Ferrari and all of this. You don't know I'm completely swimming in debt, but I look amazing while I'm doing this. And people are like, oh, damn, I want to be that guy. That's what we're talking about here. And that's not good for our mental health. It's really not. Other studies have shown that people, conversely, interestingly enough, swearing off of social media, even if it's for a few days or a week, basically has had their mood elevated in a positive way. It's done wonders for their mental outlook. So it's possible that this era of social media, which is driven by Facebook, could be ending due to everything that I just mentioned, which I think is driving the last point here that I really want to make. And that is that research and evidence shows us that teens, the younger generations, are abandoning Facebook in droves. Teens are not abandoning social media, but they are evolving into things like Snapchat and Instagram, which is a different animal, in terms of how they operate versus what Facebook offers you as a platform. There are still more than 2 billion active users on Facebook every month. So obviously Facebook's not going away, anytime soon. It might take them a while to officially wind down and be dead as, let's say, the younger generations, basically abandon them and move back. Facebook has been banking on the fact that younger generations at some point will get older, will start to psychologically have a better relationship with their parents, because we all know the teenage years, screw you, mom and dad, I'm going to do my thing. And then in your 20s, you come on back, you join your parents on Facebook. But we are starting to see, because we've had about 7-8 years now of Facebook in this mode, that's not coming up with the numbers that they're thinking that they are getting right now. And obviously time will tell, but it seems like the core of Facebook's business basically isn't the up and coming generations. It's Gen X and older generations beyond Gen X, like the boomers, etc., and maybe a little bit of the older millennials, those that are closer to Gen X, or those that consider themselves Zennials or the micro generation. And I think the reason being is that let's say the Zennials to Gen X and on all basically remember what life was like without this kind of technology, playing outside, gets dark and your mom calls you home, kind of thing. And so by virtue of that, it's going to be easier to wean, let's say, the Gen Xers or the baby boomers off of the existing social media. I also think that as we look at this, beyond, let's say, the baby boomers and moving to the silent generation, which is older than the baby boomers, these are people that obviously did not grow up with any semblance of technology like the boomers. Gen X adopted it, when they were, 10-ish or 20-ish years old, compared to, let's say, some of the later, the younger generations. And so it's easier to wean us. But as those older generations start to die off, unfortunately, then I think we're going to see that shift and that kill in social media. And so if we are transforming into a new era of social media that's going to kill off Facebook's core model, and basically what I'm hoping then will emerge something that is going to be way more secure, obviously cybersecurity, but is also not going to rule our lives in the way that it does. What does that look like? How do we create something that let's say doesn't speak to our worst nature of jealousy and inadequacy and vanity for a lot of people that have to post every little picture of every little thing that they do all the time? I think that's something that we really need to combat. Now, I do think we are moving into this next era, though, because we are seeing other platforms explode that do not necessarily directly compete with Facebook, but are taking a chunk of their core demographics, meaning the younger generations, away from them. And so we're going to see where this goes, but I'm not so sure that we're going to kick this addiction. I think we can make something more private and secure, but I'm not necessarily sure if we can kick that which is the addiction of social media. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. This was absolutely fascinating, and I thought it would be an interesting way to end Friday, with a good discussion on what social media is going to look like in the next 10, 20 years. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because this is your news of the day. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe and stay online. Thanks, guys.